This is Sandra Carter, minister of the great gospel of Jesus Christ. Today I'll be talking about why did he run? Why did he run? Now, when we're talking about somebody running and why he ran, we'll be looking at the prophet Elijah. And we know that Elijah was a man who was used mightily of God. Now, if we look at the book of 1 Kings, chapters 17 through 19, we find out exactly what happened and what brought us to this present situation. Now, first of all, God used Elijah to prophesy that there was going to be a drought in the land. And the drought would not be over unless it was spoken by the prophet Elijah, because he said that the drought will be in effect according to my word, and that was according to the word of the Lord. So therefore he prophesies that the drought is coming, and lo and behold, it does come. So the land goes through a drought, and then it's really in a famine. And so we find that after about 3 years that Elijah, he begins to meet with Ahab. Now, Ahab was the husband of Jezebel, and Elijah had been hidden for a while. When after he made this prophecy, he'd been hidden, but now God has chosen to bring him out of hiding so that he can communicate what his desires are for his people at this time. And so he comes out of hiding and he tells Ahab to go and to gather all the children of Israel at Mount Carmel. He also told Ahab to gather the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah. There was going to be a challenge issued to the prophets and to the children of Israel, because he said when he got to the mountain that how long will ye halt between two opinions? If God be God, serve him, but if Baal, then serve him. So the challenge was set forth that there would be 2 bullocks prepared, one for the prophets of Baal and one for Elijah unto the Lord. And Elijah said, if you will dress the bullock, place it on wood, and place it on an altar, and call on your God, and the God that answered by fire is God. And so they agreed to this challenge. The children of Israel, they were also in agreement with this. And so he allowed them to go first, and they prepared their bullock. They prepared the wood, and they prepared the altar, and they called on Baal, hoping that he would answer by fire. But they called all morning and they got no response. They even called all afternoon, even cutting themselves trying to get Baal's attention, but yet and still they got no response. Then it was time for Elijah to call upon God. So he built an altar that was made of 12 stones, each stone representing a tribe of Israel. He then placed the wood on the altar, and after that he placed the sacrifice. But he went a little bit further. He built a trench around the altar. He also had them to put water on the sacrifice, and he had them water the sacrifice 3 times so that the water went all the way down into the trench. So everything at that point, it was soaked. And then he began to call on the name of the Lord. And God responded. He responded in such a mighty way. Fire came down from heaven. It not only consumed the sacrifice, it consumed the wood, it consumed even the altar, even the water and the dust that was in the trench. So what a mighty God it is that we serve. And now that God had showed himself, Elijah had all the prophets of Baal slain. and he told the people to not even let one of them escape. And so after all this went on, we find that Ahab, he runs back to Jezebel and tells her what happened. And of course Jezebel was very upset because these were her prophets. And she said, "So let the gods do to me also, if not by tomorrow about this time, that you are not as one of them." So she was saying that, "Elijah, I'm getting ready to kill you." And so we find that she sent this message to Elijah. And when Elijah heard that message, he ran for his life. He went to Beersheba and left his servant there. And then he went just a little bit further, a day's journey into the wilderness, and found himself under a juniper tree. And there he asked God that he should die. So now we come to this question. Why did Elijah run? Why did he run? Now when we look at everything that Elijah has gone through, we would think that he would have enough faith and trust in God to protect him from Jezebel. And we would just think that he trusted God enough when we look at the history of what has really been going on. Because we know that God had him to deliver the prophecy about there being no rain. And when God gave him that prophecy and when he delivered it, the Bible says that God told him to go and hide by the brook. And when he went to the brook, God had the ravens to bring him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening. And he was able to drink water from the brook. When the brook died out because there was no rain, he told him, "I have prepared a widow at Zarephath to sustain you." And so when he went to the widow, he found that she was getting ready to cook her last meal for her and her son. But he told her, "Well, when you do that, just make a little cake for me first and then prepare for you and your son." And he said, "By the word of the Lord, then your meal and your oil, it won't run out until the day that God brings rain upon the earth." And so he was there with her, and God sustained them all because he miraculously made that little bit of meal and that little bit of oil sustain all of them until it was time for the rain. So God did some mighty miracles through Elijah, but yet and still we find that when Jezebel threatened him, he just ran for his life. And so we just have to look at this just a little bit closer and see what really could have been going on, because when Elijah got up under that juniper tree, he was just ready to die. One thing that we can actually see is what he said to God. And he was saying that, "It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And when we think about all the things that he has gone through, God has used him in a mighty way. God has at some point even isolated him in order to protect him. But yet and still we see that he's just tired. He's been through a lot. He's had victories, but there have been times where he has just been overwhelmed. There are times when he may have just felt stressed. He may have even felt that he had fulfilled all that God wanted him to fulfill. Perhaps he felt that his ministry was over, and even then that his time on earth was even over. So he has a lot of things just going through his mind at this point, especially with this threat coming from Jezebel. And that's why it's important for us to know that when we are used of God, and we can be used in a mighty way, that we're not to go in our own strength. We may have weakness, we may have fear, and we may have doubts. So we really have to lean and depend on the Lord. He is where we get our strength from. That's why he tells us to look to the hills from which cometh my help. For all of my help, it comes from the Lord. So we have to look to him. We have to lean and depend on him for his strength, his power, and his protection. In Isaiah 26:3, it truly tells us that he will keep in perfect peace all those whose trust is in him, whose thoughts turn toward him. And so when we lean and depend on him, and we have to keep our focus on him so that we are not going to be distracted by the things that may be going on in our lives. Now, when Elijah went to sleep under the juniper tree, we know that God was still with him. And we know that because as he slept, an angel came and woke him up, and he said, "Get up and eat." And when Elijah woke up, he saw that there was some bread that had been baked on coals, and there was water. So he got up, he ate, and then he laid back down. And then the angel comes a second time and tells him the same thing: get up and eat. But he also says that the journey is too great for you. And so he gets up and he eats. And the Bible says that he went in the strength of that bread and that meat for 40 days and 40 nights. And so Elijah, he goes further into the wilderness, and he goes to Mount Horeb. And he goes there, and he goes to a cave. And as he's standing in the cave, he hears the voice of God, and he says, "Well, what are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah says, "Because I've been jealous for the Lord and the children of Israel. They have broken your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've killed your prophets. And now I'm the only one left, and they're trying to kill me too." And so the Lord tells him to go and stand up on the mountain. And he goes and he stands up on the mountain, and the Bible says that the Lord passed by. And as he passed by, it says that there was a great wind that came that even tore rocks from the mountain. But the Lord was not in the wind. It also says that there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. It says there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. But then there was a still small voice. And when Elijah heard the still small voice, he went back to the cave, and he stood at the entrance. And then we hear the voice of the Lord come again, and it says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah, he tells him the same thing. He says, "I've been zealous for the Lord because the children of Israel, they have broken your covenant. They have torn down your altars. They've killed your prophets. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." Elijah felt alone. And as he said, as he was telling the Lord, he felt that he was the only prophet of God that was left. But of course we know that was not true. But it was not until he began to seek God that God would reveal his plan unto him. Because at this point in time, Elijah was simply asking for God to take his life. God kept and provided for Elijah through so many things, and he did it in a miraculous way. God still had something for Elijah to do, but Elijah truly had to seek God. And as he was seeking God, he found that he was not in the strong winds. He found that he was not in the earthquake, and he was not in the fire. But he had to hear that still small voice in order to know what it was that he should do. Now, we don't know what he heard in that still small voice, but we know that he heard the voice of God. And so when we seek God, that is what we need to be listening for, that still small voice. Not looking at the things that are going on around us. It's just like Peter when he was on the boat and Jesus came to the disciples in the midst of a storm. And Peter told Jesus, he said, "If it's you, Lord, then bid me to come." And he did. And Peter came and Peter walked on water until Peter took his eyes off Jesus. He started looking at the wind and he started looking at the waves, and then he got fearful so that he had to say, "Lord, save me." So we too, when we are seeking God, then we have to keep our eyes really just focused on him. We have to listen for that still small voice, and we will hear that still small voice when we are truly seeking him, when we truly put our hearts and our minds into looking to see, "Lord, what will you have for me to do?" He will answer our prayers. He will give us that answer. He says, "Those that seek me early will find me." And it is his desire that we find out what his perfect will is for our lives. But we truly have to keep seeking. So just remember, we need the strength, we need the power, we need the protection of our God each and every day in every situation. But we have to seek him. We have to continually seek him so we'll know what he will have us to do.